Good afternoon, everybody. Again, my name is Zach Holland, and I'm the general manager for the Bluebonnet Groundwater Conservation District. And part of the kind of what I've been asked to go over and touch on today are the GCD role and some county tools for addressing overall growth in districts, in counties, and how some of those pieces and parts overlap over time, where the groundwater conservation district, being the state's preferred method of groundwater management, touches in and goes kind of takes the reign, but also some other preemptive measures that counties and municipalities actually have authority to implement into their overall planning and management for their counties. Again, to address the lightning fast development, the master plan subdivisions, the return on investment from the developer side of things, and trying to balance and recognize and acknowledge all of those different perspectives all at once, while also kind of touching on the cumulative impacts and the ambiguity of where exempt wells kind of fall into the greater state of things anyway. Before I get started too far, part of the groundwater community is being able to call people out that think that they're being really sneaky and not acknowledging things. And one of those, since I'm graced by her presence, is Miss Carrie Dodson, who is celebrating a birthday with us today. I am smart enough not to say which one, but we greatly appreciate you spending our time with us. So thank you, ma'am. So getting back to this really fun slide that I probably had way too much fun at a lot of other people's expenses on this, of having the conflicting, compounding, yet compelling concurrent conundrums. If that doesn't sum up where subdivisions and platted subdivisions that are planning exempt wells and individual wells on that spectrum, I'm really not sure what is. Again, when you start talking about just the overarching kind of opinions, thoughts, and really overall ordinances and planning that goes behind subdivisions at the county level, there's really very broad restrictions, limitations, ordinances that are even outlined for counties and municipalities, and it still takes them picking up those tasks and those pieces to implement them. And again, as all of y'all know, as political cycles go through and how counties and municipalities can change over, one regime may pick up and start with this, and then it kind of gets lost in the wayside. The other thing is again, as everybody knows, when you submit plans for platting and everything else, you're only susceptible to the rules that are in place and passed at that time. So it can create an extra layer of headaches for counties and municipalities to really kind of catch up and get ahead of the next development, and not just kind of keep spinning their wheels and kind of being behind on where their growth is overall happening. Again, this also, unfortunately, I did put it in parentheses, so it's officially in black and white. This actually kind of falls into the category of exempt wells from a groundwater conservation district side too. It's pretty broad. I mean, it's not quite as broad as beneficial use, but it's pretty close. Again, as you see on the other side there, for exempt wells, as long as they meet a 10-acre requirement, produce less than 25,000 gallons per day, meet any possible spacing restrictions that are in place, whether that's just TDLR, being off of property lines or away from other wells or septic systems or other point source pollutions, you're pretty much exempt. And there's not a whole lot of things that Chapter 36, especially on our end, really affords for addressing those potential issues. Part of those subdivisions and things like that, again, they a lot of times get branded with, cutting corners because they're throwing in platting submissions right before, wells or the rules are being able to catch up with them. They also, sometimes go as far as pre-drilling water wells and septic systems, basically to master plan them out before they even start. It can help on the front end from an exempt well, and again, that kind of individual and cumulative impact that certainly as the groundwater resource manager we're concerned about, and as a county municipality are certainly interested in, from the perspective of making sure that they're not doing irreparable harm down the line. I've even seen some subdivisions that attempt to try to deed restrict how deep or where kind of layers or depths that groundwater wells must go in a subdivision. Again, it's a Band-Aid on the front end and really doesn't address the individual or cumulative impacts that some of those master planned subdivisions of, a concentration of 700, 800, 1,000 total wells on less than 1,000 acres can ultimately have. And again, you're ultimately stuck with this conundrum of which entity is responsible for the design and ultimately setting the layout and the standards of it. You have the developer who ultimately has to try to meet those standards. They have the frustrations of needing to realize their return on investment and grow their development over time. You have that pitted against, they want to submit and apply by the rules, but they don't necessarily like county municipalities not only changing the rules, but when those rules get in the way of that investment and return on that investment. You have county and municipalities that are trying to work together to understand and figure out where they are, with the other understanding that oftentimes they think that once it's a groundwater issue, that's the GCD's deal, and there's nothing that they need to say or do about it. And so again, we'll touch base and again refer to this lovely thing called the TCEQ Groundwater Availability Certification for platting that can come into play from not only the district's perspective, but certainly for the county and municipality perspective. In theory, this is going to play. Maybe. Do I need to press something on my end or on y'all's? No worries. As most of the folks in this audience know, this is the Abbott and Costello Who's on First skit. Again, they go back and forth. The manager knows exactly who's on first because who is on first. Not what, not I don't know. It's who's on first. And the guy that you're trying to explain that to just really doesn't completely know, understand, and can't fathom and get on the same page. And fortunately or unfortunately, that pretty much sums up the entire conundrum that we find ourselves in the county municipal GCD and developer kind of triangle in going through subdivisions. Again, from the onset of confusion and to continue to build off and build out of this kind of construct and get us closer to the ballpark that we're really trying to talk about and get into, you have the GCD approach and the authority. Again, GCD can exempt and set spacing requirements for exempt wells. Again, we talked about the 10 acres, 25,000 gallons per day spacing, but it has no oversight and really no to the oversight or authority on the subdivision planning, platting, or zoning. Again, that's all the county and municipal authorities. Really, the only time that a GCD really sees anything about a lot of these subdivisions is on the back end when we're actually getting the registrations, and it's one at a time, and we don't see the full picture until we get to physically see it on a map. Then you have the municipal and county approach on authority, which is, again, groundwater is completely in the purview of the Groundwater Conservation District. I don't have to worry about it. Yes, but no. Again, it's with the ability and the discretionary ability of the county municipal authorities under these two lovely codes, Government Code 212 and 232, respectively. It does allow for some more communication and higher level communication that can work in between the GCD, the county municipal government, as well as TWDB. And again, we'll touch base in a little bit more detail on what the specific requirements on the TCEQ provides under the chapter there. So again, we didn't get to hear the skit, but you've all seen and kind of know how the overall duration of it goes is, this graphic, okay, we're finally in the ballpark. We know we have first baseman, second baseman, shortstops, and third baseman, but we still don't necessarily get them all in the right order. And explaining and getting everybody on the same page is really what we're trying to do and achieve, not only from, making it clear to the developer on their side what their responsibilities and what they're being asked, but also having the wherewithal on the county municipal authority as well as the GCD to put our best foot forward and make sure that we have the data and the resources available to not put our counties in a bad development spot to, degrade, harm the aquifer, or put really bad developments in place that can ultimately be a black eye on our counties as well. So again, going in and keeping and maintaining the loveliness of this baseball analogy, we want a pitch that's right in the wheelhouse. Again, we want to facilitate sensible, comprehensive practices to alleviate the common impacts through cohesive approach. Again, get everybody on the same page on the front end before dirt's moved, before any of the big spending really comes into play, before it becomes an issue on the backside that's a lot easier to alleviate and fix on the front end than it is on the back end. So again, who's who on first covering the bases? I couldn't help but just kind of continue to carry this forward once it was in my brain. But again, on the left-hand side here, you have the three entities. Kind of the three conflicting, but all pointing and pulling in the same direction. Again, the developer and the landowner, they want and have a desire to cut up their pieces of property, to develop it out, to grow and expand the county overall. On the second step in a second tier, everybody aiming, trying to get to the same spot, is the municipal and county governments that ultimately sets those standards. Again, and getting them on board with allowing this and employing this voluntary groundwater availability certification is a great step forward and step into to actually be able to bring the GCD, their expertise and their knowledge and know-how of the resource to discussions on the front end versus the district having to respond and alleviate or try to help fix the problem on the back end. And again, there's three primary interests here of the here and now, the further down the road. Everybody also kind of in this process kind of wants a CYA policy if they don't want it coming back on them, whether they're still in office, out of office, or moved down the road, whether it's the developer, the municipal, or the GCD. Everybody wants that same protection and assurance that everybody's on the same page and pulling in the same direction overall. And again, with the ultimate goal of enhancing the value and the quality of growth while preventing degradation over time to the resource or the county's development potential moving forward. I pulled this quote directly from the Texas Register that laid out the adoption of the groundwater availability certification for platting for counties and municipalities. Again, it's set to provide a standardized approach to statewide certification of groundwater availability for platting. If a platting authority voluntarily chooses to require the certification, the platted subdivision should be built with an adequate water supply. And that's really what we're honing into and making sure that these three individual groups are on board with, and that's the target that we're all aiming towards. And again, this may avoid the cost to local government and taxpayers of having to provide unplanned and emergency services to a subdivision developed without an adequate water supply in the end. I really liked and appreciated this level of direction when this was put in June 30th of 2000. Again, it even back then, and we'll talk about it in a minute, all of its huge advances in groundwater and groundwater science since the year 2000 that come into play that kind of help further track this standardized approach that we can continue to build off of. And again, this gives us a proactive, preemptive assessment. Again, we get to analyze any potential impacts from drawdown, well interference, subsidence, stream flow, whatever your localized aquifer is susceptible to from an impact standpoint. You get to realize and analyze that on the front end to make the best decision moving forward. Again, that can be cumulative impacts when you're looking at multiple wells, whether that's at separating depths or the same depth, however you want to kind of divide and conquer and look at that, you have that ability to review it on the front end through this assessment and through the general aquifer tests, in addition to utilizing additional available data such as the groundwater availability models, for example. You can plug any of those types of projects in, run them, and see what the impacts are going to do. You can do that for individual wells. You can do that for a centralized water system as well, and see what the gives and takes of that are. Again, a centralized distribution system is a huge upfront cost, but it's an even bigger cost if you have to try to retrofit that to a subdivision after the fact, and especially in those emergency or unplanned circumstances like were mentioned previously. Again, this brings to the forefront the design and the development side of things. Again, making sure everybody's on the same side and pointing in the same direction. That's the biggest thing of all. Again, there's a very clear and decisive difference between the three groups here, between the developer, the county municipalities, and the GCDs. But we should all be pointed in the same end goal. And again, it protects and benefits all parties involved. It gets everybody on the same page. Everybody knows on the front end what they're being asked to do, how their review and analysis is ultimately going to go, and what the goal of that analysis is going to be. It balances the interests of development to, again, ensure that development is not just on the up and up, but in the best interest and done the best, not just for the local county municipality and for the local subdivision, but also for the GCD, that it doesn't put them on the hook down the road for these emergency or unplanned type responses. And again, it employs prudent project development, best available science, the best management practices, and ensures that you're using all of the available tools. Again, it's only as good as the ones that you use it, but when you've got those at your disposal, it's a lot better to use them. And as you know, my dad told me a long time ago, it's better to have and not need than need and not have. And this is just a really great and an easy step to put everybody in that predicament. So again, a quick touch on Bluebonnet's management and policy to explain a little bit on our approach and why we have identified kind of the specific pieces out of the groundwater availability certification for platting that we did. In our non-exempt permitting for wells greater than 8-inch diameter, we have a hydrogeologic report requirement for those wells. And it's divided into a phase 1 and a phase 2. The phase 1 is essentially what are the known data sources, whether that's existing well logs, existing data, groundwater availability models, existing wells, anything that's existing, not having to move dirt, drill new wells, or do anything like that. On the front end, what can we evaluate, and what are the expectations based on what we know? Again, it evaluates those impacts using the existing data, and we do employ the DFC groundwater availability model run to tie it back to our DFC to ensure that we're not impairing our DFC through our permitting and that three-step process of planning, management, and policy, and building those together. Again, it sets standards and expectations to further inform the review and analysis. Again, anybody that walks in the door of Bluebonnet knows what the standards are, knows how to get their permits, knows and understands the groundwater availability model is the standard, and it standardizes that from a perspective of not having on the front end the issues of one consultant versus another consultant. Again, we can still have arguments between consultants on the applicability or the usability of the groundwater availability model, but we at least start with in the same fruit basket, so to speak, and we can argue about whether it's a red apple or a yellow apple later. Furthermore, it compares, impact options. Again, you can look at where you physically place wells. Again, in this instance, for a subdivision with multiple wells, you can actually plug multiple wells in and review it in that manner as well. And it gives guidelines that are directly applied to several required criteria tied in and used and identified by TCEQ in the groundwater availability certification, which reflects, again, some general advances in science that just flat weren't there in 2000 or 2008, which was the last time that this code was touched. And again, then the phase 2 comes in where we actually build out and direct a field test and a site-specific model to understand what's physically at that property itself. And again, Bluebonnet has gone as far as actually placing this guidelines and this assistant package directed towards the county and municipal governments and authorities in our management plan and our district rules. We wanted it to be made very clear that it's certainly something that we're aware of as far as the tool itself, in addition to really emphasizing that we offer our entire resource as a district, our expertise in full support of utilizing this tool. We understand that a lot of times counties and municipalities don't have, groundwater centric or groundwater knowledgeable folks. Well, we are that avenue and that resource for them. And we want to provide that if asked and as requested. And again, it provides that assistance on the front end from the development, the review of that development, and the overall assessment of anything that they're putting in. So to touch base now and getting to more of the meat and potatoes of what this TCEQ groundwater availability certification form is found in that laundry list of numbers up there. First and foremost, it was created, again, as we saw in July 2000, to implement Senate Bill 1323 from the 76th Legislature in 1999. Quick show of hands, how many folks were part or still around for that session? Yet another reason why this statute should really be updated. Again, from just the last day that y'all have been here, y'all have heard and seen countless things, as well as some other breakout sessions on some of the advances that we've had in planning and mapping and science and the technology, the groundwater availability modeling and the like, whether that's from the Water Development Board that has led those efforts, or individual districts that have taken on the crux to build out what they need on their end. There's been a huge advancement in science since, again, the original creation date, but most importantly, the last time it was touched was 2008, which still misses the entire groundwater availability and groundwater planning perspective that we now employ thanks to 1763. Again, we can look at it. It covers and centralizes several pieces of the projected water demand estimates. Again, how much and what of this project is ultimately being planned. Is this a 20 houses on 20 acres apiece type of development? Is this 20 houses on 1 acre type of development? There's a big difference in the total amount of water that's needed there. It revolves and calls for the acknowledgement of the general groundwater information. Again, another great tie into the known and available sciences that we have identified, not only to us as the Groundwater Conservation District, but are also offered throughout the state. Site-specific groundwater data, again, aquifer test, water quality analysis, all of those things are pretty standard for any development that you're already going to be utilizing and using. So not going above and beyond or trying to put an undue amount of information or requirements on the developer or the county to have to prove. But it's all relevant data that the county and municipal authorities can ask for on the front end and review before actually approving anything. Again, the other fun piece of this is they require a 30-year availability analysis. 30 years is great for financing. Doesn't really do a whole lot in the water planning perspective, because that well or wells are probably going to be expected to be producing long after 30 years. So again, just another tidbit of information that would be really great to update over time if we can. And Bluebonnet has been in contact with TCEQ about some of these issues as well, and have begun the discussions on what it would take to kind of not necessarily employ what our view and our application of this, but at least getting it up to code and recognizing the best available science in the groundwater planning perspective, which are those groundwater availability models for utilization. Again, PEs or PGs must certify the adequate groundwater is available, which again is generally a big thing, not only for their licensure, but also the counties and the municipalities and even the GCD to ultimately rely on. And again, there's 7 specific references that we highlighted, as I mentioned, in our management plan and our rules to review the general susceptibility and cumulative impacts of these issues. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on these because y'all can see the codes and it's going to be different for each and every one of you. Whether you're a GCD, you're a developer, or a county municipal authority, your aquifer is going to dictate how critical or how influential these pieces are. But these are pieces that I wanted to highlight for y'all on the way that we thought through this process and at least identified areas that could tie in. Again, the section 7B14 again should address the potential impacts such as drawdown individually and cumulative. That's a big component of what we're advocating for, as well as the subsidence spring flow where applicable. Again, the phase 1 report, we kind of offer that as a great guideline to implement and reference in writing the rules that they and their standards, because we're already kind of pre-ready and predetermined to be able to utilize those, and it makes this process a whole lot simpler than reviewing other work that we don't necessarily know the direction it's coming from. Again, aquifer testing, the phase 1 and phase 2 are great resources that we've got, and we've identified for further identifying those. Section 8 and 8C, 8 and D, again, for need for additional aquifer testing, we think that this also opens up the availability to ask more specific, not just site-specific, but aquifer-specific questions. You know, whether you're in the Ogallala, the Gulf Coast, the Carrizo-Wilcox, or anything in between, all of those aquifers and in those areas are going to react very differently. And so we believe that the wording and on the code gives you those opportunities to kind of highlight and ask more of your specific type questions. Again, and considering the anticipated method of water delivery, again, even if you want to do individual wells, it's a great thing to at least look on the front end, you know, kind of as a CYA policy for everybody involved on what the differences are. And so also everybody knows on the front end. And again, utilizing the aquifer test data to determine aquifer parameters, which is ultimately the key to that entire process, and touching base and keeping those in perspective. The last one here is, again, the assumption and uncertainties inherent with determining that. This is kind of the general catch-all that all models and everything else generally have in it. Again, prudent project development and best management practices employed at all times is always your best interest and in your best interest at heart. Again, ultimately what we're trying to get to is enhancing the planning, management, and policy development and implementation across all 3 platforms. Building the foundational relationships, again, implementing the GCD and their expertise to the level and on the front end with the county and municipal governments to help them out and make sure that we're all pulling and driving in the same direction. Emphasizing prudent project development on the front end, and again, allowing and forcing all cards to be on the table from the get-go. Again, here's my contact information for any of y'all. If y'all have any questions, either here today or certainly online, I will do anything and everything I can to work with you. And again, with that, I greatly appreciate your time and efforts.
Does anyone have a quick question? Yes, sir. Charlie.
Yeah, and I think that ties back into our use of the groundwater availability model and whatever that general planning horizon is. Oh, yes, I'll repeat the question. So the question was, if the 30-year availability time frame isn't adequate and may need to be updated, what should it be? You know, what number? From my perspective and our approach to it, in utilizing the groundwater availability model, that centralizes and standardizes that process to whatever the current planning cycle is, and will kind of utilize all of the best available science that you've got on the table. Okay, the question was the political will of TCEQ to make changes. Great question. I think that since it's not necessarily a revamp that needs legislative changes to update, it's more of just an update to their rulemaking. It's more of kind of finding if there's enough will, interest to do it, and wrapping it into, kind of the best use of their time of getting it on the record and getting it. It's not certainly one of those things that's probably going to rise to the level of a standalone rule change in and of itself, but when their next rule change comes up, hopefully it will be up for discussion. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I have not done that level of research, and the question was if I had any understanding or guess on how many current counties or municipalities utilize this certification. And I honestly can't tell you. I can tell you that all four of my counties either have it or are working to implement it right now. But outside of the four walls of my district, I'm not entirely sure how many are fully utilizing it. I'm going to run while I can. I greatly appreciate y'all again. Thank you.